have you seen there's a man behind who follows you in white shalwar kameez? And he said, it's the intelligence services, they're following you. I had an interview scheduled with President Zia. I went to my bag, I took out the photograph of the man who'd been following me, and I put it in front of the president. The president got up and left the room. And I was preparing to go to sleep. Phone rang. And this man said, I'm one of the president's secretaries. You saw the president this morning. He said, you expressed an interest in visiting a neighboring country. Are you still interested? You know, Afghanistan had banned me from visiting the country because they didn't like what I'd written before after the Soviet Union had invaded. So when a publisher approached me and said, would you like to do a book about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan? The only way to do it was to use my sabbatical. We used to get a sabbatical every 6 or 7 years and go to the border city of Pakistan and try to infiltrate Afghanistan from across the border in Pakistan. Now, it so happens many of my colleagues had done exactly the same thing. They would fly to Peshawar, which is a border town in Pakistan, make contact with the Afghan opposition groups. There were about 7 or 8 of them, and ask them if they would take them across the border. So I thought, I'll do the same thing. You know, it's happened so many times before. I went to Peshawar, and the first day I was there, I remember going to one of the 7 or 8 opposition groups, and as usual, I presented myself. They knew all about me. And I said, do you think you would help me go across into your country? And in the morning, they said yes. In the evening, I got a phone call saying, sorry, not possible. I thought, oh, well, maybe it's some bureaucratic error. But this happened time after time. In the morning, I would go. I'd say, I'm Shyam Bhatia. I'm writing a book about your country. And this is the newspaper that I write for. And they'll say, welcome. We know all about you. When would you like to go? And then in the evening, I'd come back to the hotel where I was staying. It was called Dean's Hotel in Peshawar. And I'd get a phone call saying, so sorry, it's not possible. There became a pattern, you know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, 7 times. Morning I'd go, evening I'd get the rejection phone call. I didn't know what was going on. And at breakfast one morning, the waiter who was serving me breakfast said to me, Ji, aapko Urdu aati hai? Sir, do you speak Urdu? And I said, yes, I do. He said, have you seen there's a man behind who follows you in white shalwar kameez? Do you know who it is? And I said, I don't understand. He said, it's the intelligence services, they're following you. And sure enough, in the morning, after breakfast, when I took an auto rickshaw to go back to one of the Afghan opposition groups, I looked behind me and there was a big, heavy-set man dressed in white shalwar kameez on a motorcycle. And wherever we went, he went. We swerved, he swerved. If we went right, he went right. If we went left, he went left. And then, you know, I thought this is completely unacceptable. I could take a picture of the man. So I took out my camera from my bag and I went click, click. And I managed to get his image. And he saw what I was doing. He tried to evade. He went left and right, but he couldn't escape me. And I then went back to my hotel, but I was unsuccessful in my mission of trying to get across into Afghanistan. So I packed my bags. It so happened, only by chance, I had an interview scheduled with President Zia, the president of Pakistan, the day before I was due to leave the country. And I went to see him. And I still remember that day. It was in the evening. It was in Rawalpindi, 4 hours drive from Peshawar. And General Zia was seated behind his desk. He's a short man, big sort of square face, moustache. And he got up from behind his desk and he said, welcome, Mr. Bhatia. Put out his hand to shake my hand. I said, thank you, Mr. President. He said, I hope you've had a good time. I hope the country has been good to you. And I said, well, actually, it's not been such a good time. And he looked at me and said, why not? I said, your intelligence service, they follow me everywhere I go. They sabotage my attempts to try and cross the border. Oh, no, he said, Mr. Bhatia, I think you must be imagining things. We in Pakistan consider you a friend of the country. So at that point, I went to my bag. I took out the photograph of the man who'd been following me and I put it in front of the president. I said, sir, this is the man who's been following me in Peshawar for the last several weeks. At that point, the interview ended. End of interview. The president got up and left the room. And I thought, well, that's it. I've shot my bolt. I better go back to London. I went back to my hotel in Islamabad, which was nearby. and I packed my bags. I still remember it was a British Airways flight the next morning, and I was preparing to go to sleep. Phone rang, and this man said, "I'm one of the president's secretaries. You saw the president this morning, or rather earlier this evening." He said, "You expressed an interest in visiting a neighboring country. Are you still interested?" So I realized what he was saying, and I said, "Yes, of course I am." He said, "Which group would you like to go with?" And I said, "Oh, Jamiat Islami, headed by Burhanuddin Rabbani." And he said, "All right," he said, "can you be in Peshawar tomorrow by 6:30 a.m.?" And I said, "Yes, of course." So I rang British Airways in London. I cancelled my flight. And in the morning, I took a taxi. Early morning. I must have left Islamabad about 1 in the morning. I was in Peshawar by 6:30, and Rabbani himself, the leader of Jamiat Islami, was standing outside his headquarters waiting to greet me. And he said, "Welcome, Mr. Bhatia." He said, "We want to help you in any way you can. Are you ready to go?" And I said, "Yes." And that was it. Straight away, I was escorted by a group, and we crossed the border illegally into Afghanistan. I spent at least 2-3 weeks inside Afghanistan, had the most fantastic experiences. When I say fantastic, I mean professionally fantastic. We watched Soviet warplanes bombing Afghan villages. We saw ambushes of Soviet troops. By the end of 3 weeks, I had enough material and photographs for the most fabulous feature. You know, it's so strange. This ISI, this Pakistani intelligence agency, it's so powerful. You know, they have torture chambers, they interrogate people at will. They are not accountable. How do people deal with them? How do ordinary Pakistanis deal with them? And I remember mentioning it many years later to a Pakistani friend, and I said, "You know, they followed me everywhere." He said, laughingly, he said, "Oh, welcome to the club. That's what happens to all of us." But the lesson I learned was so interesting. The lesson I learned was, it doesn't matter who you are or what you're doing. What matters is who you know. In my case, I knew the president of Pakistan, and he was able to ride roughshod over his own Pakistani intelligence services, and I managed to get what I wanted. I've been telling you about my encounters with the world's intelligence services. So please tune in next week and every week thereafter if you want to hear more about what I've called the Spy Chronicles.